Hi everyone, this is my run on Dimensions and Entropy, tier 16. And as always, before we go into the battle, I will be providing a quick overview of this fight, as well as the reasons for my party composition. So, this fight is quite a lengthy one because it has 5 waves, and all 5 waves are more or less boss waves. And on the first wave, you have 3 ghost brothers, and this is the same as you faced before. They are pretty unremarkable. When one brother dies, the remainder 2 will enrich, and likewise when 2 brothers die, the remaining brother will enrich again. So ideally for this, you want to kill them off at roughly the same time. The Ghost Brothers can only be dangerous if you let them amass a lot of Brave, because then they can use a Brave and HP attack called Dark Bargain. However, if you keep them broken or at a very low Brave level, they tend to use either Darkgar or Touch of Gloom, which is more or less just a usual Brave attack. On the second wave, you have a pair, so 2 Ankh beasts, and the Ankh beast will always start the fight hovering in the air, so in other words, in the airborne state. While in the airborne state, they are a bit tankier because they get a buff to their stats on attack, defense, and max brave, and it takes about, I guess, 4 or 5 turns before they land down and are grounded. Other than that, it's also pretty unremarkable. They do have an AoE attack called Noble Wing, and notably something called Raining Sky, which when used will grant themselves a whole host of generic buffs, so attack up, defense up, and int brave up. So you want to prepare for this by either having dispellers in your team, or someone who can inflict a range of frame debuffs, or at least debuffs that can push off their generic buffs. If you can keep them manageable, so through good damage mitigation, then they are also pretty unremarkable. They don't tend to use their HP attacks if they are in a broken state or at very low brave levels. The third wave consists of a pair of Cum-Cums and 1 Brain Pan. Now this is also not too bad. Again, as with the previous 2 waves, as long as you keep them broken, it's pretty manageable. The third wave specializes more in Doom attacks. So in other words, inflicting a debuff on you that when it ticks down, so here the Eerie Sound Wave can inflict Doom. When it ticks down, will insta-break your characters. The Cum also has an attack called Death, which also has a chance to insta-break your character regardless of the brave level that you are at. And it really only gets dangerous if you let them break you and amass a lot of brave. But otherwise, I think the third wave is the easiest wave in the entire 5 waves, and probably is meant to give you a little bit of breathing space in the middle of the fight. The fourth wave are a pair of snail creatures called Ymir. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. I just call them mirrors. And the unique mechanic in this fight is that like the jeweled turtle boss that you've probably faced before, at low enough HP they will proceed to hide in their shell, which provides them a big buff in their defenses, as well as bettering themselves for about 30 to 40k brave. So the challenge here is to try to break them before they can come out from their shell. Because if they come out with quite significant amount of breath, they can use it to do an HP attack on your character and kill off at least one of your party members. If you break them while they're in the shell, when they come out from the shell, they'll just do the slime attack, which is a brave attack that delays you by 1 turn. So try to think about strong brave shavers, either big DPS characters with big damage potencies who can deal damage through the buffed defenses, or gravity based attack units, or maybe even characters that have instant break built into their kit. And for the 5th and final wave, it's just a single enemy, but a fairly dangerous one called the Demon Wall. So the Demon Wall cannot be knocked back. First of all, it has a recast ability, so in this Dimensions End fight, it's the only wave where the boss has a recast ability. And once it's fully charged up, it will use Crush, which is a brave and HP attack. And at lower HP levels, it can use the more powerful Crush Plus. It also has a Dark Energy recast ability that does brave attack that delays your party by 2 turns. And the notable thing being a Demon Wall is that its stats increase, in particularly its speed increases the lower its HP becomes. So ideally speaking, if you have burst or summon, this is probably the best wave to use either your burst or summon or both, so that you can quickly burst down the Demon Wall once it's at low enough health. Okay, so there are many party members that will give you a much easier time here. For example, of course, recently with Edward and Kimari's release, they make good party members here. Edward for the excellent crowd control through his LD Lullaby skill, and Kimari of course provides great defenses and total blindness, which helps to mitigate damage quite a lot. Ardyn is also quite useful, and you can actually solo this tier if you have Ardyn fully maxed out along with his burst weapon. But if you want to solo, you do need his burst weapon because you need the extra charge of his LD so that your overkill buff can last the entire fight. Beyond that, Kefka, which is released on the same day as these Dimensions End, is also a very notable unit that can be used quite well here. In particular, of course, with his LD, he can inflict 6 frame debuffs on the enemies. So for example, on a wave 2 with the pair of Ankh Beasts, although they start off with 1 frame buff, you can still inflict 5 frame debuffs on them, which will prevent them from buffing themselves up when they use Raining Sky or Great Mazer. Likewise, for the other waves as well, you can inflict debuffs to prevent them from buffing themselves. Of course, Kefka also comes with Blind and HP attack disable in his Trying skill, which will help you to protect against the various HP attacks that each wave can do. In particular, of course, on the 4th wave with the pair of Mirrors, where they can hide in their shell and amass a lot of Brave, you can just then inflict them with HP attack disable to save yourself when they come out from their shell. Along with that, Kefka's EX is also an insta break, so another way that you can bypass the Brave battery on wave 4 is to just use his EX to break the snails when they are in their shell. And lastly, on the final wave with the recast ability, of course, if you inflict HP attack disable on the Demon Wall, it will not be able to use Crush or Crush Plus. In terms of other notable party members, because most of the waves here have multiple enemies, having strong AoE characters will greatly reduce the turn count that you will need, especially considering like the first wave and third wave have 3 enemies each, and this fight does have pretty tight turn count at 100 turns for all 5 waves. So in terms of my party, I used Squall, Kefka, and Rinoa. I was lucky to pull Kefka's burst weapon when I was aiming for his LD. So my Kefka is fully maxed out. I use Squall and Rinoa to complement this, mainly because Squall and Rinoa has excellent splash damage built into their kit, which helps the turn requirement here a lot. And Rinoa also has healing built into her Angelo cannon as well, so in case any of the enemies do get through an HP attack, Rinoa can heal quite quickly after. Beyond that, as long as you keep the enemies in check, it's pretty easy. If you find yourself having a difficult time, you can use tanks like Nine and Bash in particular, has excellent damage mitigation that will help make this fight much easier. I did take 85 turns in my run, but that was actually because I didn't use Kefka's burst in the end. I got to the point on wave 5 where I felt that I could just finish the fight without using his burst, and so I just completed this tier without using Kefka's burst. So I guess it also shows that if you don't have Kefka's burst weapon, this tier is still very easily manageable. So with that said, let's move on to the fight. I'll see you there. Okay, so the first wave is pretty easy, and you don't really need to use Kefka's LD on the first wave, mainly because in my party composition it's very AoE heavy, so it will make very quick work of the Ghost Brothers on the first wave. So I just use Kefka to inflict his debuffs to really cripple the enemy team, and then Rinoa will stay in Angel Wing form so that she does her splash damage. I did use one of Rinoa's LD at the start once she's out of Angel Wing form, for firstly to change her stance to her Angelo stance, but also to provide her with the LD framed buff. And then with Squall, it's just going LD into Renzo Kuken. It's actually better to use Renzo Kukens more on the first 4 waves, because the 5th wave is a single enemy, so Solid Barrel is better used on the 5th and final wave. Other than that, with strong splash damage characters, it's all about just trying to damage the Ghost Brothers evenly while keeping them broken. So if you see one of the Ghost Brothers getting brave, just target that Ghost Brother with your character and break that Ghost Brother. Otherwise, try to keep them evenly damaged as much as possible. So one thing I forgot to mention is that every wave in this Dimensions End is immune to lock debuff. So tanks who rely on it, such as Zack, Celeste, or Snow, is not very useful here because you're not able to taunt the enemies. So very nicely, I managed to actually kill all 3 at the same time and prevent them from enraging. Alright, wave 2 will have the Ank Beast immediately use Monarch's disposition and rise right at the start of the battle, and there's no way to prevent this unless you summon at the end of wave 1, but really that's a waste of summon. While airborne, they are a little bit more tankier than when on the ground, but so long as you have either strong DPS characters or strong support units that provide big attack buffs to the party, you can still do very considerable damage to the Ank Beasts even while they are on the air. While airborne also, a lot of their attacks will grant themselves buffs, so this is a good place to actually debuff them with Kefka and use one of Kefka's LD skills to enframe his debuffs so that you actually prevent the Ank Beasts from granting themselves buffs. So here I use Hyperdrive and I debuff the Ank Beasts. At this point they have 5 framed buff slash debuffs on them, so they have their frame buff, and then Kefka has 4 frame debuffs on them. There's no need to use Trying here. Using Trying will only inflict blind on the Ank Beasts, and unless you enframe the blind, they can actually displace the blind buff when they use Great Mazer, because Great Mazer will grant themselves a single buff. You can use Trying to displace that buff, so that is one use, but what I'm saying is you don't need to use his LD again to enframe the debuff that Trying grants. It's not needed. And while the Ank Beasts are debuffed, you just go to town and do your splash damage. The fight is really much more challenging if you have no way of displacing their buffs or dispelling their buffs, because with their stat up while in airborne mode and granting themselves buffs, it stacks to a level where their defenses are quite high and their attack damage is also quite high, making it much more difficult to manage controlling their Brave. So they finally landed, and the fight is actually made so that while they are on the ground, while they are grounded, you try to deal as much damage as you can. But you can see here, as long as you have party members that counter the mechanics pretty well, by the time they land, they will be very close to death, or if not dead already anyway. Okay, so wave 3 is very similar to wave 1 because it's also 3 enemies here, and the fight on wave 3, similar to wave 1, is really only dangerous if you let them amass a lot of brave. They will try to use Doom type of mechanics to insta-break you to try to buy themselves some time to amass their brave, but so long as you keep them broken, it's really not a very dangerous fight. Between the three, the brain pan in the middle I think is the more dangerous one, mainly because it can inflict Doom debuff on you. The Cum-Cums on the side, they do have the death attack, which has a chance to break you, but it's really only just a chance of breaking, and the death attack doesn't actually debuff you. In particular, also if you have Kefka and you blind the Cum-Cums, it's very unlikely that they can land a death that can break you. At this wave, you don't need to go crazy on the skill use because the next two waves are significantly more risky or dangerous, that where you should try to conserve more skill users. That said, the characters like Rinoa has insane longevity. In fact, I ended the fight with many of skill users left on Rinoa because most of the time she uses her EX to put her in Angel Wing mode, and I just use HP attack while in Angel Wing mode to deal significant amounts of damage. Okay, wave 4. At the start of wave 4, it's pretty straightforward. The snails will use slime attack to delay you, but otherwise they really only get dangerous when they start hiding in their shell. Alright, so you can see here the Emir B has used in shell and height and has a battery itself for 36k brave. You can still break them with strong DPS characters. In fact, Rinoa or Squall can very comfortably break that amount of damage. Notably, Kefka's EX also provides an insta break. And if you're somehow not able to break them, just inflict them with HP attack disable will also protect you. Okay, so now both of the snails are hidden in their shell, which makes it a bit more tricky to manage damage. So it really depends on your party composition here. Uh, if you have strong gravity brave shaving, it's very easy to get around this. If you have to, you can use your summon on this wave. Although if you have a mechanic that can protect yourself against them amassing great amounts of brave, it's better to use your summon on the final wave. Okay, wave 5. If you've come to the final wave with your summon intact, at this stage it's probably a home run for you. Either that, or if you have a character with a burst mode, you can just use either the summon or burst mode to quickly down the boss once it's at below 50% health. With my Squall, I saved just one or two Renzer for the final wave to reapply his generic buffs, but otherwise him using Solid Barrel is enough. With Rinoa, just keep her buffs up and use pretty much any of her skills and into EX. If you want to be more turn efficient, you can of course burn her Angel Wing skill to charge her EX meter and use her EX. Although, with strong DPS or turn efficient DPS characters such as these, the turn requirement isn't too difficult. And of course, having burst mode helps as well. Although you will see that I didn't use Kefka's burst in this fight. So the first time the boss reaches full recast bar, it will aim to use Crush to deal HP damage to your party. But at this stage, if you have debuffed the boss with Kefka, especially if you've enframed the debuffs, you can actually avoid the Crush attack. So at this point the demon wall is below 50% health, so that's when I decided to pop my summon. And then from here on in, it's just about piling on the damage inside summon, and likely you'll be able to kill off the demon wall either inside summon or shortly after summon has ended. I guess it also depends largely on who you have available for this tier in Dimensions End. I could have really used characters like Ardyn or Edward to have an even easier time on this tier, but I wanted to save both Ardyn and Edward on a future tier. So I decided to use Squall and Rinoa and just have Kefka mitigate all the damage in this tier. I actually plan to use Kefka's burst after summon has ended, but at this point I realized that the boss is already so low in health that probably there's not much point in using Kefka's burst other than shaving off a few turns. So I just made the decision to end the fight without using his burst. And that's it. As always, if you enjoyed the video, do leave a like, a comment or subscribe. And till then, I'll see you in the next chaos fight. Bye bye.